Alright, I had no intentions on making this post-game video tonight, and I know I said that in the last game, but felt that I should make a video to acknowledge Lavine getting his career high against the Hawks, despite the fact that the Bulls fell apart in the fourth. But for this game, there was nothing really to be excited about or noteworthy that should elicit a post-game video, especially when I know most folks, including myself, aren't interested in hearing about the Bulls right now after a loss like that against the worst team in the league. But there has been something that has been bothering me recently about how certain games have been transpiring for the Bulls, and I think the frustration has finally boiled over to the point where I need to vent about it. And before I forget all of my thoughts on the matter and waiting to do it in a video tomorrow, I wanted to get it all out there now, and that is with the NBA's officiating. Now, if you've been following my channel for a while now, you know that I rarely complain about the refs, nor do I ever blame a loss on the refs. I've only actually mentioned it recently in one video, I believe it was last week, where I called out the refs and how it's getting a bit ridiculous that the Bulls haven't been getting the calls that you see so many other teams get, particularly as it pertains to Zach Lavine. The guy can get absolutely hammered in the paint, and it's a no call. Now, in that video, I spent maybe about a minute or so on calling out the officials, but the NBA officiating has gotten so out of hand that I can't not vent about this as it keeps going on further. Now, first, let me say before I go in on the refs and all the errors from tonight, at least to my recollection anyway, is what I'll try to remember what happened from tonight. I'm sure there will be some that I missed, but first, let me just say, refs aside, the Bulls should have won this game. There's no excuse losing to the worst team in the NBA. I don't care if you're on the road. I don't care if you've been traveling a lot recently because of the crazy schedule with so many games put together. You have to come out and win this game, especially after a loss against the Hawks where you completely fell apart at the end. Alright, so I don't want you guys to think, well, you can't just blame the refs on this game because the Bulls have to come out and play better overall, which is 100% true and valid. The Bulls shouldn't be in a position where they're letting the refs determine the final plays of the game that could swing a win in one team's favor, okay? This should have been a blowout, in my opinion. I will say, though, that the Wolves have a talented team, so I'm not surprised that they came out to play and they played hard. They have an all-star player in Karl Anthony Towns. D'Angelo Russell is now back from injury, and obviously he's a great player. They have a solid playmaking point guard in Ricky Rubio, their number one overall pick in Anthony Edwards, so they have talent. They just haven't been able to figure things out, and they've been suffering from injuries throughout the season. So their record probably doesn't really do this group a ton of justice to say that it's inexcusable to lose against the worst team in the league. I mean, yes, it's still bad, but these are still NBA players, and it's a talented young group, so they're going to have good nights of basketball. But regardless, the Bulls, were very bad tonight. The Bulls have still struggled to shoot from outside. Guys were sloppy with the ball. Vucevic was getting out-rebounded and outworked tonight by Karl Anthony Towns on both ends of the floor. Patrick Williams went scoreless. They still turned the ball over 13 times. So it's not like the Bulls had a good game, okay? So I don't want you guys to think I'm just bashing the refs and blaming them for this loss based on what I'm about to get into, because the Bulls have to be better than that. They have two All-Stars now, young, talented players, and solid veterans. So there's no excuse for it. But as for the refs tonight, look, I think there's nothing more annoying for a fan than to see the refs deciding who wins a given game. And of course, it's the most frustrating when it goes against your team. Now, I'm just going to go off the top of my head here, so I'm sure that there's going to be some bad call moments against the Bulls throughout the season that I'm going to miss, but what sticks out to me is the game against the Warriors. It was the third game of the season when Damian Lee hit that game-winning three, when the following day in the NBA's last 2-minute report, it came out that the refs missed a call on a 5-second violation when inbounding the ball. Then even after the ball was inbounded, they missed an offensive foul against, I believe it was Looney, who was setting an illegal screen that allowed for Lee to get open and hit that shot. So that's one right there. That's a game that the Bulls, if the call had gone their way, they would have won. Now, I still, for the life of me, can't understand why the NBA hasn't implemented an inbound shot clock similar to what the NFL has in, say, a play clock. That way it is visible and not just left to one ref counting in their head on an inbounds play and just calling it whenever they feel like it. But that's besides the point. It was a missed call that would have resulted in a win for the Bulls. Then, of course, there was the jump ball, and I say that in air quotes, that they called on Lavine against the Blazers in that game that to this day still pains me to bring up. where the Bulls were up 5 points with 10 seconds left in the game, and Lillard hit those back-to-back threes. That was not a jump ball, and Lavine was clearly fouled, which would have resulted in free throws for the Bulls to go up 2 possessions and likely would have resulted in a Bulls win. There were 2 other last-minute reports that indicated the refs missed calls that went against the Bulls that were critical plays, but I'm blanking on which teams they were against. I'll have to go back and look at some of the previous reports or old tweets from Casey Johnson to confirm. And then, of course, I can't tell you how many games that, guys have just been hammering Zach Lavine, and not even just Zach Lavine, but Bulls players in the paint, and the calls aren't coming. Because, for Zach Lavine anyway, he's an all-star. And you would think that some of these calls would go in his favor because star players get calls in the NBA. I'm not saying it's right, and I don't think that actually should be the case. Calls should always be made fairly, no matter who it's for or against. But the fact of the matter is stars get calls in this league, unless you're Zach Lavine for some reason. So that's sort of the history behind this and the frustration that has been mounting for me, and I'm sure is also the case for Bulls fans as well, as I've been seeing people commenting in some of the live chats that I've been having. Then you have tonight's game. And like I said, Bulls shouldn't have found themselves in a situation where they had to rely on close calls or bad calls from the refs at the end. But be that as it may, I think one of the most notable ones was a 3-point attempt, which I believe was in the third quarter from Zach Lavine, where he clearly got fouled getting hit on the hand after the release, which would have given him 3 free throws for the Bulls to close the gap in the lead further. But instead, the Wolves came down on the other end after the missed 3, of course, and scored a 5-point swing. Now, I'm not one of those fans that says, well, if they had called that foul correctly, that would have been the difference in the game because the Bulls only lost by 4. But no, there are obviously a lot of factors that could have changed the trajectory of the game, even if that foul was called correctly. But either way, it was an obvious foul. Go back and watch it. Even Stacey King and Adam Amin were stunned it wasn't a call. I would show it here if I could, but I also don't want to get a copyright strike. Now, going down to the end of the game, and there were other bad calls, by the way, but I won't get into those. Like not giving Karl Anthony Towns a T on some of those calls where he was crying and complaining to the ref, but I'll leave those alone for now. But towards the end of the game, there were some calls that really, really bothered me. First, there was that 3 that Lavine took in the corner, which I think there was about a little bit less than a minute and a half to go in the game, where you had his defender slide his feet underneath him before he had landed from the shot, which we all know is a flagrant foul now. You have to allow shooters space to land, and despite the fact you had a ref literally standing in front of the play, there was no call. That's 3 shots because it was a 3-point attempt, and the ball because it's a flagrant foul. That's a difference maker in the game. Then, of course, when Lavine had that and one to cut the lead to 4, which I believe there was less than 30 seconds left in the game, he unfortunately missed a free throw that the Bulls really badly needed. But then on the rebound, you had Naz Reid straight up push Tice out of the way and into Patrick Williams, knocking both of them over onto the ground. And that was even after Patrick Williams was fighting for the rebound when he was getting stiff-armed by Karl Anthony Towns to move him out of the way. That kind of move likely isn't going to be called, so I can kind of live with that one, even though it is still a foul. But a blatant push on Tice, are you kidding me? You're going to choke on your whistle with right there with less than 30 seconds left to go in the game for something that blatant when you already choked on your whistle on that flagrant foul in Lavine with a guy sticking his leg out underneath the shooter and you're looking right at the play. We've seen that happen to Valentine and to Coby White this season, where they've been hit with flagrant fouls when it wasn't even as obvious as the one in today's game against Lavine. It absolutely boggles my mind how bad the refs have been this season. And I know you can't pin it all on the refs. The Bulls have to be better. The refs don't play poor defense. The refs aren't the ones that cause you to turn the ball over. The refs don't miss the shots. That's on the team. That's on the players. But there's something to be said about completely shifting momentum and players getting frustrated when calls aren't going their way and then end up committing fouls out of frustration by the poor officiating. And I personally feel that we have seen that more often than not against the Bulls this season. I'm tired of it, and I think the NBA has to do something to hold these refs accountable when they're clearly not doing well at their jobs. I'm not saying they're doing it intentionally or that they're throwing games for certain teams. That's nonsense. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I do think some are just bad at their jobs. And like any other profession, when you make mistakes or you perform poorly, you get reprimanded for it, you get demoted, or you even get let go as a result. And until the NBA actually does something about that and they start implementing consequences for poor officiating, nothing is going to change. Because why would you change your performance at your job if you weren't being called out for it, or there was a threat of losing your job? You wouldn't. Anyway, that's probably enough of me rambling on about that. Overall, a bad game, a bad loss for the Bulls, bad officiating. I think, the one and only bright spot from this game was that Troy Brown Jr. continues to show that this kid has a promising future and should absolutely be getting more playing time, especially in closeout situations, mainly for his defense. He had 15 points tonight, 7 rebounds on 6 for 7 shooting, and 3 for 3 from deep in just 22 minutes of play. And of course, Tice has still been looking really great, 13 points, 7 rebounds, 3 assists, and 3 steals. But outside of that, Lavine had a nice game, obviously, 30 points, 7 rebounds, 6 assists, and he was actually great at taking care of the ball tonight. He only had 1 turnover, but again, another loss. Even with those great numbers, you got to start seeing some of these stat lines produce consistent wins for the team. And I know it's not on him, it's on the team as a whole and the coaching staff, but he is still the leader of this team. And as great as he's been playing, we have to start seeing wins coming from it. Anyway, I feel like this video has probably gone on long enough as it is. I wanted to say a little more about the game itself, aside from the bad officiating, but still a little too frustrated to go into it further. I have been very skeptical of some of Billy Donovan's rotations and lineup adjustments, especially in the fourth quarter. I do think he left Lavine and Vucevic out for too long before bringing them back in to close out the game. I get that he's trying to get them some rest, or as much rest as possible, given we have a game tomorrow night as well, but man, every game is critical right now, and you need your best players on the court in these closing minutes when the game is close. So I'll leave it at that for now. The Bulls are right back at it tomorrow night, this time against Memphis, which isn't going to get any easier, a team that has been on a roll recently. But I'll go into that in more depth in tomorrow's video and my weekly preview video. So be on the lookout for that. I'll have a live game chat for the game as always. If you guys are interested, feel free to check that out. Be sure to subscribe if you're a Bulls fan, as I post daily Bulls content. And thanks for tuning in, guys, and I will catch you in the next one.